a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown. My name is Gordon. We're here this week with Sean Forman, the creator of Baseball Reference, which honestly, we probably would not have nearly this successful a podcast without, because we use it all the time, literally in the middle of episodes. We actually just will look up stats in the middle of it. So we're very lucky to have you here today, Sean. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And so, I mean, honestly, one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about was actually starting Baseball Reference, because you started it back in like 2000 while you were still a grad student. And yeah. I mean, I was just getting on the line at the time. I was only like 12. So, but like, even I remember, it was like, MySpace was still like a pretty big thing back at the time. Like, what existed out on the internet at that time for stuff like baseball?
There wasn't a whole lot. I think that, even back then, MLB.com was actually owned by a law firm, and Major League Baseball, it was still MajorLeagueBaseball.com. I don't think they bought them out until like maybe 2003, 2004 or something like that. But there wasn't there was a lot for current season information. For like ESPN had a partnership with Starwave. I don't know if that's way back when, but they would have, current season stats and things like that. But I was always big into the history of baseball, and I wrote for a book called The Big Bad Baseball Annual for a number of years. And I really just thought that, I have had those big baseball encyclopedias, that are 1,300 pages or more, or 2,000 pages, and weigh about 13 pounds. And I really thought that the web would be a great way to present that information, because you could be on Joe DiMaggio's page, you could click on, 1940 Yankees, see all of his teammates, go to their page, see all the stats there. Be a lot faster than thumbing through the book and finding all those pages. So to me, it felt like a real natural fit for what the web was in terms of hypertext and things like that. And so, it was really mostly to scratch my own itch. I did not have any intention of it being an ongoing business or anything like that. It just kind of has grown organically from that point. And so, I did it part-time so the basics, I just created very basic pages. All the player pages, team pages, leaderboards, league pages, and that's really about it. Those were the main pages that we had on the site. And then from there, it's just kind of grown, by leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. So it's really about, about just putting in a little bit of time here, every day to make it work, just a lot of steps to getting to where we're at right now, I'd say.
I'm sure it's more than a little time, right? It was a lot of time.
It's a lot of time. It's been many, many hours over the years. Yes. My wife early on was wondering, like, why are you up at, 12:30 at night, we're working on this when you could be doing other stuff. So it's she's been very patient. I've been very fortunate, to have an understanding family, along the way.
I think what's interesting, what's part of that is that we actually spoke with Jillian Gieb, who was one of the official scorers for the Rockies earlier this year. Okay. And she was talking about like what she has to go through when she's actually scoring a game. But like, we see it on Baseball Reference. Stuff gets updated like at the same speed the official scorers are basically doing that. So how are you guys able to get that data updated on Baseball Reference so quickly?
Yeah, so we're definitely not live. We're updating the next morning, as game results come in. So there's a lot of people perceive that we're like watching the games and entering the data, but that's not what we do at all. We are we're working with data partners who do have people watching the games, entering the data, and then they license that out to third parties. So, that business, when we started, was not a huge business. We actually didn't update until like the end of the year for the first 6 years. It wasn't until I started full time that we actually updated daily. And so we've been able to, work with partners who will send us a feed of data. We pay them an amount of money, and then we have programs that take that data, put it into our database, rerun don't rerun everything because we don't need to rerun like a 1954 box score, but we rerun a lot of player pages, a lot of team pages, and then upload it onto the site. So the whole thing is about a hour and a half to 2 hour process each morning. Gets longer as the season goes on because we're rebuilding all of the box scores every day for the season. But it's about an hour and a half to 2 hour process, and it's all on a good day, everything's automated. It kicks off at like 4 a.m. and by the time I wake up, the site's updated, and I don't manage the day-to-day anymore for the site, but the programmer who does it, by the time he wakes up, hopefully the site's already updated.
It kind of ends up a little bit, I thought, but now to describe it, maybe I'm not as sure, as being sort of a Wikipedia for sports content, obviously across the sports reference family.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly, Wikipedia is I mean, truth be told, probably one of our leading competitors for sharing and providing sports data. I mean, but in a friendly way.
They're very different. So I wouldn't.
I would never think of you guys, because it's like, to me, if I wanted stats, I would always go to like one of your pages first compared to Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is not laid out for it like yours are.
Right. Yeah, it's maybe more relevant in a sport like soccer. We see a lot more people going to the Wikipedia for soccer than for our site. But the thing about obviously Wikipedia, they're not automatically updating their pages. An editor has to go in there and do it. So we're able to leverage what we do, but I do think in the sense of trying to compile like all the relevant information and put it into a cohesive whole. I think Wikipedia, IMDb, places like that are kind of, I'd say our brethren in trying to do this.
Just this year, you guys made a point about Negro League ball players and adding those stats, and I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. We would, but we noticed when we go in there that Baseball Reference lists about 22,500 players that have played the game. But when we're doing our calculations, and there's a point to this, right? We thought there's about 20,000 players that have played the game. And we do that because our theory is we could have more folks in the Hall of Fame and still keep it under 1.5%. Well, that kind of works at 20,000. If you added 30 guys or so, you'd still be just under 1.5%. But at 22,000, that's even better. So please talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So so at the start of the year, it was noted, like, I think maybe it was either May or June, we crossed the 20,000 threshold, which was short-lived for that player because we, in the middle of the season, we launched, working with Seamheads, a major addition to the site where we're able to add, we started recognizing the Negro Leagues from 1920, the major Negro Leagues from 1920 to 1948 as major league on our site. So we had always had Negro League stats, but we, just for historical reasons, had not really incorporated it into the major league database. And when we did that, that obviously added several thousand additional players to our database, hundreds of teams, hundreds of ballparks as well. And so now we list all those stats side by side and include them in league leaders and all that kind of stuff. So, seasonal leaders and career leaders and things like that. So that was a big step forward. We're really proud of that work, and we're fortunate to have good partners with that. And it was a lot of people worked really hard here to make on our end to make that happen, and hundreds of people worked hard, for the last 50 years to make that happen as well. So it was a great project to be a part of.
We had a guest on a podcast who came on, Gary Livacara, who writes a baseball blog, and old time baseball photos and all that. And Gary talked about the East-West All-Star games, which obviously came sort of right out of that. And that was really fascinating to understand how popular that was. And that history is really important to baseball. So we're thrilled that stuff is included. Just turning for a second, because you guys have launched obviously Sports Reference, which is, I won't say new. The components of Sport Reference, I think, were around, but as a aggregate. So talk about that, because it's college, it's other sports, and just the vastness of the data just kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming at times for me as well. Currently we have I think it's 7 sites. It's 8 sites, if you include StatHead. So we have, so if your listeners are likely familiar with Baseball Reference already, we have the same thing basically for pro basketball, pro hockey, pro football, and then college football and college basketball. At least on the men's side, we're hoping to launch a women's college basketball site this winter, I think. And so and then international soccer. And so we, those sites all launched different times. Pro football was actually like only 11 months after Baseball Reference when that launched. And then pro basketball was maybe 3 years later, and then hockey, another 3 years, and then college like a year or two after that. So all of those sites except for soccer have been around for like 10 years now, at least, most 10 to 15 years. So they've grown in size. Basketball is actually almost as popular as the baseball side at this point.
What?
I know, it's shocking to me as well. That the international audience for basketball is so strong. I mean, Australia is like our 3rd biggest audience, because of their use of pro basketball. So, and then the soccer site's only 2 or 3 years old, because that's the world of pro soccer is vast. I mean, it makes baseball and minor league baseball and foreign baseball look like child's play almost. Leagues and competitions and all that. So it's, I think we have a good offering there, but it's been a little hard to get our feet in the door with that. And then we have our StatHead tool, which launched about a year and a half ago, which was a repackaging of the play index tools that we had on baseball and some of the other sports. And that's our subscription feature. And basically it allows you to kind of access our database and run your own queries and build your own leaderboards and make your own lists of, weird and unusual statistics or, your own favorites. So that's something that we've also been building out substantially, and that's available across. We don't yet have it on the college side, but for the pro side, that's still available across all sites as well.
Honestly, it's pretty fun because we probably should have looked at that, because a lot of this podcast was born out of a very particular data argument that my father and I had all the time, which was, did hitters back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s have consistently higher averages in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings because the same pitchers would pitch the full baseball game every single time?
Right.
So it stands to reason that, like, if they're not having it, they're going to get hit harder in the late innings. We were actually able to go back through Baseball Reference and started checking out. And what we saw was it was less that it made the hitters better back in the old days, but rather the hitters today suffer way more from having to face relief pitching.
Right.
And it was just,
there's very much a third time through I hadn't thought about that, whether Lou Gehrig got a big advantage because he saw so many pitchers the third or fourth time through the order, which rarely happens now. So, it's an interesting question. I hadn't thought of that.
We put it under the idea that Ty Cobb had it so much easier than Mike Trout. Right? He's got the highest career average, but as it turns out, it didn't play out as everything exactly the way you thought. It wasn't linear, like, oh yeah, sure, it's universal. Like some guys actually, I think Aaron was better in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings,
and then Ted Williams was better in the first, in like 4, 5, and 6 than in 1, 2, and 3, or 7, 8, and 9. So
I know Stephen Jay Gould wrote an article about the 400 hitter and how, populations tend to get more and more specialized, and that reduces the variance and that's why we haven't seen a 400 hitter, basically, was his argument, is that just as things get more refined and the better players are always getting to the pros and all that. So, that's, I hadn't thought about the role that relievers might play in that as well.
Well, and the StatHead is, it's $8 a month or something like that. Yeah. So it's totally reasonable. And it isn't, there's so much data you can't use. It's a better way to use the data within Baseball Reference than trying to do a search. You go out and you come back in if you have a query, and it'll take you to the page because it's so difficult to understand that. I noticed you're a member of SABR and you won the Henry Chadwick Award, and we're a few people that actually know who Henry Chadwick was. But when it comes to SABR, and the history, what would you say, like, you would find in Sabre? Because it's a different experience and a good experience, but it's not what Baseball Reference offers. So what would you say?
Yeah, well, are you two Sabre members at all? Or
I am, yeah.
You are, okay. So I don't know if you've been to the national conventions or anything like that.
Not yet.
I think there's a perception that Sabre as an organization is like a bunch of people just crunching numbers and analyzing stats all day. And I would say that's actually a pretty small minority of the people who are in Sabre are actually like doing statistical analysis. It's really more about the history of the game. And so it's more about, there are research committees for Latin baseball, research committees for baseball cards, research committees for images of baseball, baseball in movies, the Negro Leagues, things like that. So it's people who have, a passionate interest in either some aspect or a more general aspect of baseball, whether it's historical or even present day. And it's a way for them to find people who are like-minded. For me, it was, I grew up I was born in the early 70s. And so I grew up like right in college. I was like right before the internet, and then graduate school, I was in the internet. And so I had, for me, like getting on a web board and finding somebody who cared about the Pirates minor league system the way I did, or wanting to look at, who had created like multiple spreadsheets for their fantasy baseball draft and things like that. That was eye-opening for me, and Sabre's kind of that type of organization. You can meet these people either virtually or in person, and really find like-minded people. The perception probably is that I would know a lot of baseball trivia, but when I've entered the Sabre trivia contest, I think one year I finished like second to last in the initial thing, and so it's people who are just very passionate about baseball, and so I have a cohort of friends that I met there the first time I went, and tend to come every year to the conference. They haven't had it the last 2 summers.
Right.
But I always, my wife hates it when I say this, but it's like my 4 favorite days of the year is going to the Sabre convention.
Geek out.
At a ballpark that you probably might not have been to, and just, usually close down the bar arguing about about Ricky Henderson versus Tim Raines and stuff like that. So it's a great time. I really like it.
And the history, right? What makes baseball stats so great is you've got box scores that can go back 100 or more years, and not that the other sports don't have, but they don't have that history. So it's interesting you said that basketball, because of its international aspect, may have more, because baseball is so mostly American, but not even anymore, that way. But the data and the richness of it going all the way, that's why all the work you guys did on the Negro Leagues and all that stuff, that ain't easy, right? Go back and dig that stuff up and find it. And is it real? Is it verified? How do we cross-reference that stuff? These are a lot of written accounts at times that you have to sort of parse out and go, well, it might be the best we have, so we might as well go with it. I don't know. You can tell us.
Yeah, no, that's definitely accurate. I mean, the people at Seamheads, so we do very little like primary source research in our group. We do some. We have like a newspapers account. So there are some things where one of our data developers right now is working on filling in NBA basketball draft history, and we're finding a lot of errors in what we have now. And she's going through and like finding colleges and biographical information for all these players who were drafted in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so we do primary source research ourselves. But yeah, the people in like Seamheads and Retrosheet who are like going to a library, looking up microfilm, scrolling through the microfilm, taking a picture of it or printing it out and then translating it into a machine readable format. Those are the real heroes, I think.
That's romantic. That's romantic in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I've told Dave Smith, who's the head of Retrosheet, that I feel like the Macmillan Encyclopedia was like Mount Rushmore, and Retrosheet is like Crazy Horse Monument. I mean, in terms of like the scale, it's like 10 times bigger and more elaborate, and just I mean, it's crazy that it's actually mind-boggling that they've gotten to where they are, that we literally have a box score of every American League game and every National League game back to 1901. I mean, that's just that's preposterous. How is that possible? So the fact that they've been able to do that, is just phenomenal. And they've done it all as a volunteer organization and give it all away for free to anybody who wants to use it. So
It's a beautiful thing.
It's really, if anybody should be in the Hall of Fame, probably Dave Smith and Retro Shoot should be in the Hall of Fame.
So, the non-tech savvy baseball fan, we talk about the people probably that listen to our podcast. Any tips on how they might get more out of BR and what they might do?
Yeah, so we have a lot of it's very funny. We get a lot of emails from people like, "Oh, it would be great if you did X," and like we had that feature for the last 10 years on our website. So it's a little frustrating, but one thing that I would say is anything that you see that is like red text on our page. That means that if you click that, you'll probably something interesting will happen there. Maybe it'll be it'll be a glossary for something, or it'll be on the game logs, if you click the plate appearances, it'll show you the outcome of all the plate appearances in that game for that player. If you click on the career game number, it'll show you his career totals through that game. And same with the season totals, it'll show you his season totals through that game. So anytime you see like red text on the page, that probably indicates there's additional information. We also, on many of our pages, people don't always realize this, but if you click on like 2 rows, so say you go to a column that doesn't have any links in it, click on a row, click on another row, like on a player, pitching record, click on 2000 and 2005, we automatically sum up those values for you and then present the totals and the averages there for you.
Oh, that's
pages.
That's really good, because one of the things we talk about, I'm blanking on the name, the 7 sustained years of excellence.
Like a 7-year peak sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that's actually really helpful, because that's one of the ways when we're looking at people's careers.
So if you go on any player page and go to their batting stats and don't click where there's a link, but click on the other, click like, in the home run column or something, like click in one row and then another row, it'll do a sum and an average for those seasons between those 2 rows. Same way on the game logs, it'll do that as well. So we have our basic player pages, but we have, beyond that, we have so much other stuff. We have the game logs for all the players. We have splits for all the players. We have, minor league stats for nearly all the players. In college stats for a lot of active players now and more recent players. We've got, so we have what we call advanced stat pages. And so those are, we have the nav bar. So when you scroll down, it depends on if you're on your phone or on desktop, but there are areas where it says like more pages for this player. The advanced stat pages have a lot of really interesting stuff in there. For instance, if you're looking at a shortstops page, like you go to his advanced defense page, we'll tell you how many times he turned a 6-4-3 double play, or a 4-3 unassisted double, 4-3 double play, or how many times a runner went from first to third on a single versus how many times they only went from first to second. All that kind of base running stuff is in there. How many times they stole third base, how many times they stole second base, caught stealing for those. How many times they came up with the bases loaded kinds of things, all that stuff is available on these kind of deeper pages. So, it's hard to have, if you make everything prominent, then nothing is. And so it's very hard to walk people through all these different sections,
right.
But it's a very rich resource. And I think the more time you spend on it, the better you become at using it and the more useful it'll be as you go through it.
So is there, and I should know this, but I don't, let's say I wanted to know what a pitcher actually threw in an individual game, actual pitches. So
you mean like fastball, curveball?
Like, yeah, sequencing.
That is okay. You've hit the one of the bigger gaps we have. So we don't have that. I mean, that information would be available back probably 7 or 8 years, I think,
right.
for Major League Baseball. We do have, we've just never published it, but we do. One thing we did add is we have added recently like exit velocity for batters and launch angle. And I think we may have fastball velocity. I think we added that this fall, maybe this spring, but I'm not 100% certain about that. But we are starting to move into some of these other things. the thing we do have is we can't, back to like 88, we can actually tell you ball strike counts and all that for every batter. And so that information, we can tell you what, Wade Boggs hit on a 3-2 count, in the 1992 season or, something like that. So we do have information like that.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're going to take a pitcher like Mariano Rivera and put him in there, you would just put cutter down for every pitch because that's all we have. We don't really need to
He
know
makes
that.
it a lot easier on you.
I don't know if you've ever. There was a book called. So Rob Nyer wrote a book about he and Bill James together, like Guide to Pitchers or something like that. That actually
I'm familiar with it.
Researched historically each pitcher's pitch repertoire. And I talked to Rob one time about like, can I license that from you? Can I buy the rights to use that information on our site? And he actually said they like lost all that information, and so I don't think they have it available anymore to them. Wow. So I suppose if we wanted to, we could probably just pay an intern to like copy it out of the book and put it on the page. Maybe we'll do that at some point. But there are a number of things we do like that are kind of sweat of the brow sort of things. So that might be something we could do.
The last thing that I kind of wanted to bring up here, I'm not sure if you have anything else. So one of the things is like, it's kind of a two-part thing, but one of the things is with the rise of advanced stats, and especially I think fantasy sports, I feel like the average sports fan today, in terms of not necessarily their mastery of understanding the statistics they're looking at, but the average fan is a lot more aware of the advanced stats that they're looking at. And you see it a lot with baseball, how we talk about a lot of the traditional things like RBIs are kind of devalued in today's day and age because of our statistical understanding of the game. Do you think Major League Baseball is ever going to look at maybe using advanced stats for doing some of their awards, like a most valuable offensive player, where it's looking at their home runs, OPS plus, and on base percentage instead of the traditional home runs are average and RBI?
Right. I mean, they're obviously the front offices are all in on this, right? I mean, they make all of their player personnel decisions using stats that are more advanced than even what we have, because they have more access to more data than we do. In terms of like awards, I would never propose like wins above replacement become the way you define the MVP. It's just not that exact of a statistic, and
it's a derivative stat. I always tell people. So why would you use that? It's a derivative stat, which is great for what it is.
Right. It's not, it's an approximation. It's an estimate of what the player's value is. And I think it's a good estimate, but it is still an estimate with error bars around it. And the narrative of the season is important. It's not, it's what Ohtani's doing deserves to be recognized. He has the most WAR, but even if he was, slightly behind somebody else, I'd probably argue that he should probably still get the MVP.
You'd argue about that.
I think there's a guy in Toronto that would want to argue about that.
Probably. It's so in terms of like awards, I mean, we've actually like joked that we should create like some sort of a award for like the highest WAR total at each position or something like that. I actually own the domain, the Reffies. So if we ever do that, that's what we'd use. But I mean, I think I wouldn't be pushing to. I think the awards voters are probably incorporating a lot of those things into their thinking as well. I definitely see that, in the discussion, and so it's actually one of our baseball developers, Dan Hirsch, is actually a voter for the AL Rookie of the Year this year, because he's a member of. Several of us are members of the Baseball Writers of America, and so he actually got tabbed to vote for the AL Rookie of the Year. So, I think the voters can probably make their own decisions about what stats they want to use, and I feel good about that. I do think we may see, like, one place where those traditional stats are probably still being used that's relevant is things like arbitration and things like that. I do think we'll see the leagues. It would not surprise me if in like the next bargaining agreement, there's a discussion of using some of these more advanced stats rather than using, hits and innings pitched and strikeouts and stuff like that for arbitration, levels and things like that.
And I think the MVP itself, it's more of a semantical discussion about what your interpretation of what most valuable is.
Trust me. I've been on the internet a long time, so I've had many arguments about whether it's for the best player on the best team or the best player regardless of team. I just kind of click, close the browser and move on when I see those discussions happening. I've heard every argument that could possibly be made.
We could have finished last without you. All that stuff from the past that you read about.
Like if a homer is scored in a meaningless game, doesn't count. Kind of.
You're describing Steve Garvey. Pitcher. Okay, my last question actually, and I should have asked this before Gordon asked what was a better question about overall stats. Pitcher WAR versus hitter WAR. We refer in the show, and maybe we're wrong about this, but we tend to have a little bit more understanding of the hitter WAR than really trying to evaluate pitcher WAR. Maybe you could talk about that just a little.
Yeah, and that's always a contentious one. I definitely feel Joe Posnanski wrote an article where he kind of took to task our pitcher WAR, which I didn't necessarily agree with, but I think part of the issue also is like the two main flavors of WAR are Fangraphs and our WAR, and I think Fangraphs does a fine job with what they do, and I think their statistic can tell you a lot as well. Our batting numbers look very similar. That there are little differences in how we do park factors. We use slightly different defensive numbers than they do. I feel like we're a little more exact in some of the ways we account for offensive stats and stuff. We count infield hits where they count a single as a single, whether it's infield or outfield, even though their run value is a little bit different. So I think on the offensive side, we're pretty well aligned. On the pitching side, we use very different methods. They're using FIP, which is, just looking at, strikeouts, walks, and home runs. We basically start with the number of runs the pitcher allows, not unearned, including unearned runs. And then from there, we start to make adjustments. So we make an adjustment based on the quality of opposition. So we obviously know every team that the pitcher faced, and so we can adjust for the opposition quality. If you've got if you line up against the Dodgers 10 times in a year, that's different than facing the Orioles 10 times a year. So
that's a really big point.
Expectation is going to be different. We do the same for park factors. So a starter may only throw 30 games. So even on the same team, a starter for the Dodgers may be in Colorado for all the trips to Colorado and miss the games in San Diego. So, we try to account for that on a player by player level. And then from there, we account for the defense as well. And so we use our defensive numbers, which we use in the batter WAR, to then adjust the team quality. And so all of those adjustments kind of go into the mix. And there's always one guy, each year who's like, all three things are aligned either in his favor or against him. And so his number just looks weird. Like Wade Miley was that guy this year. And for whatever reason, the Reds defense looks horrible. He's facing only really good offenses, pitching only in good pitcher hitting parks. The Reds field was, we had to make an adjustment because of 2020 really skewed some of our park factors. So we made an adjustment in August, I think, for that. But all three of those things align for him. So he's been leading in pitcher WAR in the NL for much of the year. And like people are like, wait, Miley, are you kidding me?
How is this guy?
Give it, think about it. And the math checks out on our end. So we're just, I understand the skepticism, but I do feel, one of the issues obviously is you have a little bit of uncertainty in each of those three things. Right. And so, you just gotta put a little bit of an error bar around there. And maybe you don't think Miley's the best pitcher, but maybe you should think about, is he in the top five? Are you missing something about it?
Or maybe what you're not realizing is, yes, it's confusing, but you have to realize what a different pitcher would look like if he was pitching in the same circumstances as Miley.
Yeah, exactly.
Just evaluate numbers.
Yeah. And Colin Burns, might have a much different, and Burns might have a much different, setup that he's in. So, we try to make everything apples to apples, and it's sometimes the differences end up being, we see a lot of things pile up in one person's favor, and it might lead to a number that people don't necessarily buy.
There's lots of data. There'll be lots of data anomalies. That's just the way they go together. And I saw this morning that Jacob deGrom, our favorite pitcher as Met fans, right? His season actually compared favorably with Dennis Eckersley's Cy Young season in 1992. Jake had a lower in every statistic. He outperformed him. That doesn't mean that Jacob deGrom should win the Cy Young Award because he
pitched for like 3 months.
Right, but he pitched more innings than Eckersley did. He had more strikeouts. He had better every.
I hadn't even thought of
every stat. So you can't identify. Obviously, we all know this in a vacuum. So that's what it means. You take them. They're supposed to be supportive, and it's kind of fun if they don't all agree all the time because now you got something you can argue about.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and obviously I meant Corbin Burns, not
Corbin Burns. Right.
I said Colin Burns.
Right.
Anyway, that's absolutely true. And I mean. I'll be honest with you. The reliever Cy Young / MVP awards are probably the worst, in my opinion, the worst ones that have been given out over the last 50 years. But it's putting all of those things in context is what we try to do. So,
well, great. Well, thank you. Number one, that this is actually just what I think Gordon and I hoped. You gave us all kinds of stuff that we hadn't thought about, we hadn't considered, and I'm sure the people that listen to our podcast will appreciate it, as do we.
I appreciate that. I would, we always, StatHit is free for the first month. So if somebody's on here and hasn't tried it, they can always go sign up, and the first month is free. You can cancel anytime. So, give it a whirl and see it, give it a try and look up some numbers for your own arguments and hopefully win those arguments at a higher rate than you were before.
Well, and the site is just really easy to use. So you mentioned Fangraphs, which is a good site. I like it, but it's not what I use Baseball Reference for. So there's just they can coexist. It just depends on how how you want to do that. So well, once again, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.